Uh, Ladies and gentlemen, uh, Executive Director Nancy Glazer and others, my name is Bill Babb. I'm a retired journalist and amateur historian, and we're going to talk today about the water woes of Augusta back in Oglethorpe's time. Now, I'm wearing my mask now because my wife and I firmly believe that wearing a mask and social distancing is very important to help get rid of this virus. But so you can understand me, I'm going to take mine off because otherwise it'll be sort of a muffled type of tone here. So excuse me just a moment. Okay. All right. Water, water everywhere, and not a drop to drink. This is what faced General Oglethorpe and the other founders of Augusta back in the 1700s. And you say, whoa, there's the Savannah River right next to them. There's lots of water. Well, the river really wasn't that reliable. During periods of drought, there were times when you could probably walk from Augusta to North Augusta, what later became North Augusta. And then during periods of flood, the river got really muddy and it was not very nice to drink. So the city fathers started thinking about how they could alleviate the situation. And they were just very frustrated because they didn't have the technology back at that damn time. Now, the river was there, yeah, people did use it to get drinking water and bathing water and so forth. But how do you spread the waters through Augusta as Augusta was starting to expand its limits, especially into the Somerville area in the 1820s, and of course, as we know farther on. My friend Thomas Hurd Robertson, who was an engineer, did a little treatise on the situation, and he kindly allows me to quote from his studies. He would have been here today, except he opted to go fishing. So his treatise was called Notes on the Development of the Augusta Waterworks, and this was published in 1977. Quote, it was some 87 years after the founding of Augusta in 1735 that any attempt was made to furnish the city with a flowing supply of water. Up until this time, the source of water for the city's 6,000 citizens was a series of shallow wells and pumps located at convenient places downtown. A friend of mine who is a collector of antique bottles like myself actually excavated one of those wells earlier this year. It was 20 feet deep, and they didn't find anything, by the way, other than water. Okay, now, George M. Tower, who was an Augusta civil engineer, petitioned the city fathers in June of 1822, quote, for the exclusive privilege of furnishing the citizens of Augusta with water to be brought from some spring in the neighborhood of the city, period, unquote. His petition was granted, but he chickened out 6 months later, probably because he was overwhelmed by the scope of this particular project. Later, he was joined by Joseph Eve, another engineer, and both explained the benefits of a water system, including health and fire protection, but how to go about it. Turknick Springs was located just below present-day Hurd Avenue off Wrightsboro and had been tapped as a source of drinking water since 1818. Tower had another idea, even a better idea, that the city obtained water from the Savannah River by a steam or water-driven pump. He proposed the water to be put into a sedimentary basin and through a filter before delivery to the city. One must remember that the river was often muddy, especially following a rain, and many citizens doubted that it could be made drinkable and healthy. Their objections gave city fathers something to chew on besides the mud. So Turkic Springs was chosen because of its superior quality and its higher yield of 75 gallons per minute. But how to transport it to the various parts of the city? That was the question. The engineers figured wooden pipes made of board pine logs and joined end to end by cast iron couplings was the answer. A grand plan, but it encountered many delays for unknown reasons. Many of you may recall some 20 years ago when several Augusta streets were excavated, the wooden pipes removed and replaced by terracotta pipes. I found a 6-foot-long wooden pipe lying next to a 6-inch street curb, a 6th Street curb, picked it up and placed it in my car trunk. Later, I had it sawn into 2 3-foot lengths and had a coat of epoxy applied to prevent the logs from rotting. I gave one to an appropriate description, it's hard to say, brass plaque to a retiring Georgia wildlife ranger friend. And he also was a bottle collector but didn't have a pipe. The Augusta Canal was built in 1848. Suggestions were made that the city build a new waterworks to take canal water. A study authorized by City Council resulted in a recommendation that water be taken from the river west of Ray's Creek, but the owner of property along the creek objected, and so nothing was done. Sounds typical, doesn't it? Projects today. Enter Foster Blodgett, the city's mayor in 1859-60. He proposed a canal waterworks be built to supply water under pressure for watering the dirt streets to keep down the dust and washing the drains during dry water for bathing and for extinguishing fires. Today's city waterworks is a modern modification of the system, and Mayor Blodgett had envisioned the same thing. Now, if any of you are thirsty, a water fountain is located on the first floor as you get off the elevator. I have my own supply, and I'll take a swig in a few minutes. But there were and are other sources of drinking water in the forms of mineral springs, and the Augusta area had and has its fair share. The first one that comes to mind is Windsor Springs, the name coming from British soldiers who sampled the springs during the Revolutionary War. They named it after Windsor, England. The Patriots finally drove those rascals out of this area, but they did not go away thirsty. Anyway, fast forward to 1905 when the Windsor Springs Water Company was established in Piney Woods, 300 feet above the city in South Richmond County, by W.H.T. Walker, Jr., son of the Confederate general killed in the Battle of Atlanta during the Civil War. The Walker son later sold out to the George Clark family, and the company, I think, is still in business. Other Augusta spring water businesses that have come and gone include Fender, later called Crystal Springs near Hephzibah, Merton's Crystal Springs near Beach Island, Panther Springs near Morgan Road and Tobacco Road, Bowles Crystal Spring, and the Flowing Wells Water Company. The site of the latter is still marked today by a swimming pool off Raceboro Road, and a lot of people from out of town and in town still take plastic jugs to the spring, fill them up, and take them back to use as table water. We had friends down in Goose Creek, South Carolina, near Charleston, make that long drive, and they brought 50 plastic jugs up, and they filled them all up over a period of an hour or so. And they said they had been doing that for years. Not a day passes when one today can see several vehicles lined up near the spring, which is enclosed by a brick structure. And the grounds around the spring, a Boy Scout some years ago had a project to keep the area clean and clear, and it still is today. Nancy Glazer and her staff have brought out a number of water-related artifacts which can be seen in a few minutes around the table. But before that, I wanted to bring in this little bit here. Proposed to bring water from the Turknet or Indian Springs to Augusta. The plan proposed will deliver water in any part of the city as cool as at the spring. The plan should be as follows. The tubes to be of good heart pine, they spelled heart, H-A-R-T, with a 4-inch bore sunk in the ground to a depth of from 5 to 30 feet as the situation of the ground requires, so as to have the spring water of the earth around the pipes for the purpose of retaining the temperature of the water and preserve the tubes from ever decaying, and the water to be raised at convenient distances on the main street by means of hydrants with cocks. If this plan should be thought expedient, the Honorable City Council may rely on the work being done on the most reasonable terms, and it would be commenced in 1 month and completed in 6 months, and the work would be warranted or is guaranteed. And this is signed by Thomas S. Reed and John Houghton, who are very prominent Augustans. And so another study was done that showed the city's rising population on a graph. And Augusta founded in 1735, and there was no water. And then by 2009, we had the Savannah River and the well systems. And of course, you can go up the levee today. The levee was built in the 19-teens after the floods inundated Augusta over a period of several years. I think the last one was 1908, and the businesses downtown were tired of getting their basements pumped out, so they built the levee to prevent the water from entering the city limits. It works, and then sometimes it didn't work, depending on the amount of rainfall. The 1929 flood washed away a lot of industries along the river on the North Augusta side, including the Bainham Pottery. And Mr. Bainham sued the highway department over there because when they built the 13th Street Bridge, they had the abutments come out and it diverted the water flow right into the pottery. The highway department said it was an act of God, but the Supreme Court of South Carolina disagreed and awarded Mr. Bainham many thousands of dollars back in the 1930s during the Great Depression, which was, I'm sure came in handy. Just want to show you these things over here. And I'll pick them up and bring them over. This is a Windsor Spring demijohn. This is what the Windsor Spring Water Company provided the water to the citizens who subscribed to the service. And this particular demijohn, of course, was put into a contrivance upside down. And I know a lot of you remember using this type of equipment where you press the button and the water would come out and the bubbles would rise up, like somebody gargling inside this demijohn. This demijohn was built by the Illinois Glass Company, and it contained about a little bit better than 10 gallons. Other springs, here's Harris Lithia water, Harris Springs, South Carolina, which is over in Lawrence County. And they had an office here in Augusta. And of course, this water was sold for health reasons. It was supposed to contain lithium. Some did, some didn't. but it was a takeoff on the Saratoga Springs of New York, which were people came there to stay in the hotel and drank the water for health reasons. They had a lot of stomach problems back in that day and time, and this water actually made them go, if you'll pardon the expression. And these bottles are very collectible, and these are all from my collection, or I say my bees of my collection, my wife of 56 years. We donated our entire collection of bottles to the museum in 2014, and this is a Harris Springs ginger ale bottle with an Indian princess formed on there, and it was made with Harris Springs mineral water and your favorite flavor, and bottled by Harris Springs Water Company, Waterloo, South Carolina, which, as I said, was in Lawrence, and these are highly collectible bottles. And then this particular one here is a Harris Lithia Spring Company later model, which could have contained the water, it could have contained ginger ale. They had other soft drinks made from this same stuff. They had a hotel up there, and a lot of Augustans would ride the train to Harris Springs and stay at the hotel. They had a jazz band up there, a swing band if you want, back in the 30s. A very popular place. And I talked to a lot of Augustans who had actually made the trip, some elderly people, about 20 years ago, and they all enjoyed the trip. Unfortunately, the hotel burned, and that took care of the situation. If we had anybody here to ask questions, this will be the time. But because of social distancing and the current situation with the pandemic, I count, let's see, 3 people. No, 4 people. There's another one back over there. I hope that I've only taken up 15 minutes of my 30, but I'm going to quit right now.
That's fine.
You did good.
Is that fine?
Oh, man. I mean, I do have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, please.
So Bill, you were talking about, it blows me away when I think about the wooden pipes. Do you have any idea how, I mean, they did not have the machinery, I guess they didn't, to bore. How did they get the pipe, those this solid logs they were using?
Well, that's an interesting question. They apparently did have a boring type of auger or something that they could bore through these logs straight ahead. Nancy, do we have any of those logs at the museum?
It's on view on the staircase,
Yeah,
the big log that you're talking about.
yeah.
And that's the primary one, so it's already on exhibit.
Okay, so it had the metal couplings too, the iron
I
couplings?
believe so.
Yeah, okay. Well, so people who are interested in seeing these logs need to make a visit to the museum because these things are pretty heavy and they're, you can't lift them up hardly. The 6-footer I got was fairly light, but it was also waterlogged. And but anyway, it was well done, and not just that one 6-footer, but you had multiple logs spread throughout downtown Augusta, and the city finally decided that they needed to replace those over 100-year-old logs with something more substantial, such as terracotta. And we also had a company over in near Bath, South Carolina, the Southern Porcelain Works, that I understand provided some porcelain pipes during that particular period. The porcelain works were established in the 1850s, and they're still digging the kaolin clay over there as we speak. Anybody else have anything? Free.
I think it's interesting about the bottles they use. We take plastic for granted, but you think about it, back then it was either pottery or it was glass.
Yeah, and this glass was blown. Automatic molding machines blew these things into a mold, and before that, the bottles were blown by lung power. Interesting thing, too, the South did not have a glass factory until well after the Civil War. And one of the first ones to be established was here in Augusta, the Augusta Glass Works. And the Glass Works actually provided some of the South Carolina dispensary bottles to Pitchfork Ben Tillman's dispensary system. He took over the sale of whiskey in South Carolina, put a lot of independent sellers out of business, and but the bottles that were put out were amber in color, or light brown, with a palmetto tree embossed in the glass that had SC on the top and then dispensary at the bottom. And they're highly collectible and very valuable because they only lasted from about 1893 until 1907. The dispensary system, unfortunately, was ridden with corruption. They watered down the whiskey, things like that, and a lot of the politicians involved were getting kickbacks, and so there was a big investigation about 1907. And by the way, the Augusta Brewing Company, which was established in 1888, sold beer to the dispensary called Bell of Carolina, Belle of Carolina. And in our collection, there are bottles up on the second floor on display showing the Bell of Georgia and Bell of Carolina. We also later found out there was Bell of Alabama and Bell of Florida, but nobody's come up with those bottles yet. These are label bottles, since the labels did not last very long out in the wild, shall we say.
Were there other springs in the area?
Oh, yes. I gave you a list of some of them. The most prominent ones were, of course, Winter Spring. There was Merton's Mineral Spring. That was Fritz Merton's. He had a business on Green Street in Augusta that he was a furrier, if you know what that is. He had a spring over in Beach Island, South Carolina, and my wife and I and our dog Snoopy back in the early 70s actually found it, and I got pictures. And by the way, B and I self-published a book called Augusta on Glass, which contains the histories of not only the mineral springs, but the Augusta Brewing Company and the patent medicine people like Dr. W.H. Tutt's stuff, and Edward Sheehan's Soda Works, and a lot of others. The book, the second edition of the book, is going to be handled through Amazon and should be out for the public by the end of August. And the first edition sold out. It's been out of print since 2007. Very popular book. Lots of pictures, lots of facts. It capped 25 years of research. And speaking of research, the facts about the water here in Augusta came from a number of sources, one of which was the archives online of the Augusta Chronicle, the South's oldest newspaper. And they're online, and if you're a member of the Augusta Library or other libraries in the Pine system, you can gain access to those online files free. Just contact your librarian for details. The early issues of the afternoon paper, the Augusta Herald, which is no longer around, is being put into the online system as we speak. It should be available by this fall. I tell you, as far as a research tool, you can't beat it. You go back into time to the newspapers of the era. The Chronicle is known by various names, but before it later just became Augusta Chronicle. And you can read the stories. You may see something about your own relatives. It's just a great tool. All right. In addition to that, I have a book called The Brightest Arm of the Savannah, the Augusta Canal, by Dr. Edward J. Cashin, who unfortunately is no longer with us. Dr. Cashin wrote the foreword to my bottle book, and this on the canal is really fantastic. All the information he was able to, excuse the expression, dredge up over years. And anyway, what I had to say today were just excerpts from this book. The library would have a copy of this, and I would certainly recommend anybody who is interested in this type of history to borrow a copy or go to the book tavern and buy one. The other book that I referred to was the Memorial History of Augusta, Georgia, the 1980 reprint of the 1890 issue. It was written by Charles C. Jones, Jr. and Salem Dutcher. Mr. Dutcher wrote about the last half of the 19th century, where Mr. Jones wrote about the early Augusta, including the Indian tribes that were around and some other issues of that time. Both of them highly readable, easy to read, no technical language that were everybody could understand it anyway. So those are my sources, mainly the Chronicle Archives. Yes, ma'am?
Are any of the springs still producing water and selling it?
A Windsor Spring Water Company, I believe, is still in business. And it's, of course, it's on Windsor Spring Road. And the early springs were uncovered. They came out of a hillside, and they filled up these big demijohns. They put the demijohns under the spout, and then they wait till they filled them up. Then OSHA got involved, the government agency, and they made them cover up the springs with a building for health purposes. And but anyway, they're still out there. You can still go out there and visit them, and you also sample the water, which was pretty darn good. Most of the other springs have gone out of business. We had Panther Springs on Tobacco Road, right down from the Fort Gordon gate, and it was sold about 1908, and there's a housing project sitting on top of it now. We never found a Panther Springs bottle in all the digging that we did in Augusta for nearly 50 years. I started collecting bottles in '69, and but we were digging in a landfill off Savannah Road by permission, using a backhoe. It was 20 feet deep in places. And they dumped one load, and rolling down the hill of dirt was a porcelain cap. And so we picked it up, and I looked at it, it says Panther Springs, and that had a 4-digit phone number. And that's the only artifacts that I have ever found from those springs there.
Very cool.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Oh, you're so welcome.